A lot of people talking about this supposedly magic document. Here is Leora Lazarus from Oxford University. The Magna Carta. People use it to avoid parking fines and all sorts of things. I mean, I know it's got a cultural place in our history, but is it really a foundation of human rights?
Well, it speaks to a particular kind of tradition around the idea of constraining state power, which I think is very, very central to the idea of human rights. The idea that we are vested in that human beings have rights and that the state must justify its authority over those who have those rights. Now, of course, the Magna Carta contained the germ of a very famous right called habeas corpus in this country, and that is essentially where we find the core of this notion that individuals will not be constrained, detained arbitrarily. So state power is something that we have to question, and the right to go to the court to ask why it is that we are being coerced illegitimately.
Yeah, see, Peter Greste released, and the arguments in the Middle East, and the Magna Carta is incorporated in lots of US states. Yeah. What about this argument over the European Convention of Human Rights? Is it so far away from British rights that we need our own British Bill of Rights, would you say?
Well, lots of member states of the Council of Europe, which of course is not the European Union, it's a different institution. Lots of member states of the Council of Europe have their own constitutions. And normally we have our own constitutions because they speak to a particular cultural moment. The German constitution, the Basic Law, was established obviously after the Third Reich, and it's very much about denying and moving on from their horrific past.
Right.
The British, of course, don't have a specific constitutional moment, so they will have to divine one in which to find a space in which to decide what their Bill of Rights would mean. There's no break in history, and that's one of the marvels of the British Constitution, is that it evolves and it's organic. Right. The European Convention on Human Rights, of course, was drafted by and very influenced by the British and by the great Winston Churchill. Well, that's a view. That's a view that people like to have. But it was drafted by the British. It has rights in it that has the right, Article 5, to habeas corpus. It has the right to a fair trial, which is very much a British idea. The prohibition on torture is a common law invention. So there is a lot of British influence in the European Convention on Human Rights. The question is, of course, whether the two can coexist, which of course they can legally. There is absolutely no reason why you couldn't have a British Bill of Rights and be signatories to the European Convention at the same time.
Christopher Chope, why you're a lawyer? Why is your party so upset about the European Convention? Is it just culture? Is it just name? Or are there things in there you think, apart from prisoners voting or something, little details?
Well, as we've heard, we have got a British constitution which has evolved over the centuries, which it already incorporates all these rights and goes back to Magna Carta. When we drew up the European Convention on Human Rights, it was something for other countries. That was the initial idea, because to enable other countries as well. No, it wasn't actually. It was to enable. We drew it up for them. No, we drew it up for other countries to enable them to be able to adopt the same principles of the rule of law as we had adopted. That's how it started. And now, of course, it is being interpreted. We're signatories to it, but it's now being interpreted through a judge-led law in a way which nobody had ever thought was going to happen. For example, it's saying that the right to family life means that a criminal from overseas who's in this country cannot be sent back to the country from which he came. People think that that is absurd, and that's why we don't want to be dictated to by judges in the European Court of Human Rights who are dictating an interpretation of that those rights, which is the loopholes which worry people.
It's extraordinary. I mean, you can't pick and choose human rights. They either exist and they exist in the form
from different places, as we just heard.
But we helped to draft them. You said it yourself. I mean, this came
for other people.
For other people. What does that mean?
Well,
I mean,
exactly that.
In 1948, we had a moment. There was a watershed moment in Europe. It's true, and we were a part of the peace that then followed. I think moving forward, the Liberal Democrats are instinctively international. We want to work with the rest of Europe. And these loopholes, I'm afraid to say, we aren't bound by them. We still haven't allowed prisoners to vote. We don't need to.
We don't have enough time, I'm afraid, to discuss all these European conventions. Thank you very much for coming in and telling us about it. Now, our regular round.